Hello, I'm Katie Herbold, and the legal topic that we're going to talk about today is reduction in force, or RIF, and this is quite an emotional one. I want to make sure you understand that this is not offered as legal advice. I'm just sharing my insights that I've learned as a veteran educator and administrator dealing with RIF from a number of perspectives, most recently as a school superintendent. So why is RIF necessary? Why don't we just get rid of it? Well, the reason is that we have the responsibility to the taxpayers who pay the bills to serve as a good fiduciary and make sure that we are giving them a good product for as little money as we can. So one of the reasons, though, within that is that over time curriculum changes need. This photo shows blacksmithing, which is still important as a craft, but it's no longer a mainstream career where a lot of students are going to need to know these skills. So you're not going to find many blacksmith teachers in school districts now. So reason number one would be a change in curriculum needs. But the more common reason is that there simply isn't enough money. So if a district can't afford to provide the core curriculum, athletics, fine arts, philosophy, foreign language, orchestra, all of the goodies, then something's got to go. And so they're going to have to cut back on something. And RIF is one way that that is done. Maybe there is a declining enrollment, and so they're generating fewer funds. Maybe federal funds are cut, or state funds are cut, or grants aren't coming through. So that's the second primary reason. So I'd like you to make a note here of these two most common reasons, and a loss of a grant could address both of those. You have an after-school tutoring program and the grant doesn't come through, so the tutoring program doesn't exist, there's no money, and you've got to get rid of the people who had been hired to do the tutoring. So these are the principal elements that you should find in a really thorough RIF policy. And I'd like to encourage you to go look at your own district policy and look to see if these areas are covered there. Definitions, so everyone understands what we're talking about. Affected areas, it's going to give the parameters that the administration makes a recommendation of which areas. Criteria for decisions, how are you going to decide who gets RIF'd? Consideration for other positions, if you RIF someone, can they be hired back? Notice and hearing, how are you going to tell them, when are you going to tell them, and are you going to tell them about their opportunity for a hearing? Remember due process, you got to provide that. So we're going to take a look at one policy, and this policy was chosen for a reason. It is a policy that a neighboring district had because their superintendent was not only the superintendent, but very intelligent and trained as a lawyer. So it had extra eyes on it as a legal document, and so I always had a lot of confidence in looking to their policies as models. So beginning with the definitions, as you can see here, there are some words that we don't use very often. Financial exigency, who talks about that? Well, not many of us do very often. So here it defines us, what that means. What does it mean? What is a program change? Under what situations in program change would a RIF come into effect? It's very important that people understand the difference between a discharge, which means you don't come back to work on Monday, or a non-renewal, which means you don't come back for next year. Big difference, especially if it's you being RIF'd. So as you can see here, the superintendent makes recommendations to the board, and then the board approves the areas to be affected. Let's just say you had a grant that provided for your nurses, and then the grant was cut. So you're going to have to get rid of some nurses. In that case, only the nurses are affected, nothing else is. But in really difficult financial times, sometimes everything is affected, and you've got to look at ways to cut costs in all areas. The criterion for decisions are very important, and they need to be laid out well in advance in policy. These are the guidelines to the administration on how to make the decisions. So in this policy, they start by looking at certification. Is the person certified for the assignment? If they're not, they're top of the list to go. Performance. Who's doing the best job? So in this criteria, you're going to keep the best teachers and get rid of the worst ones. If that still doesn't help narrow it down, then you go to seniority. You've got two teachers who are performing identically, then probably you're going to keep the one with the most experience, depending on what your policy says. And finally, you're going to look at professional background. Is there something about a person, their training, a certification, that makes them actually more qualified, and you move them to the top of the list to retain their job? The policy also needs to lay out if an employee can be hired back. So once you're RIF'd, are you guaranteed to be hired back if the position comes open again? Or do you have to reapply, re-interview, and be reconsidered for the job? So this lays it out so everyone knows what happens next. Notice and hearing. Remember that due process. You have to give them notice. This tells how and when, and you have to tell them how they can request a hearing so that they can be heard, so you can tell the board why they should not RIF you. And then the steps. It's very important, make a note here, that only the school board can declare a RIF and determine the areas affected. Also, know that the order of these steps is very important. For instance, hearings, number 7, is before the final decision, number 9. Because otherwise, in a RIF, there is no avenue for appeal once the decision is made. So you've got to give people a chance to be heard before you make the final decision. And finally, let's talk about the human element here. It is never an easy conversation. Even to the administrator, it is gut-wrenching. It is the last thing you ever want to have to do. And of course, you're going to follow the direction of your district and do what they ask you to do or what they tell you to do. But I'm going to say from experience, the best thing is don't just put a letter in their mailbox. That's really awful. Have a conversation in person, whether it's the HR department or the principal, but have that conversation face to face. You want to choose the time for that conversation. You want to make sure it's private, that it will be uninterrupted. You want to make sure that when the meeting's over, that they don't go out just and face the whole school. So a lot of people recommend that this sort of conversation be held late in the day on a Friday. So when the meeting is over, they go out, not very few people are around, they can go home, they can digest this blow that's just happened and figure out how they're going to face Monday over the weekend. And last of all, you want to offer them hope and help. If this is a person you would normally recommend, then offer that. Say, hey, as you go out looking for a new position, I'm here for you. If you need phone calls, if you need a recommendation, whatever you need, you just let me know. But most importantly, help them understand that being RIF'd is not the same as being fired for poor performance. It's very different. Encourage them and help them to understand that administrators in other districts will understand that being RIF'd was not a reflection of their performance and that they will be a good employee. Thanks for listening.